Welcome to my channel, and today I want to share a story that will inspire anyone who has ever faced betrayal, loss, and adversity. It's about a woman named Amara, whose life was turned upside down after the sudden death of her husband. Left with nothing but a broken heart and a harsh family, Amara's journey to reclaim what was hers, her dignity, her legacy, and her future, is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest moments, strength can emerge. From being cast out in the rain to rebuilding a business and her life, Amara proves that the greatest power we possess is the resilience to rise again. Stay tuned to hear how she turned her pain into power and created a legacy that no one could steal. The sun blazed over Ibadan that afternoon, but the air around the cemetery felt cold. Amara Okoy stood in silence, her white headscarf fluttering gently in the wind. Her husband, Chike, was gone, just like that. 1 week ago, they had been laughing together over breakfast. Now she was standing there, watching men cover his coffin with red earth. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't broken inside, but because she could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, judging her behind her. Chike's family whispered among themselves. "She ate his destiny," one woman hissed under her breath. "A young man like that, dying just like that. She's not innocent." Another voice muttered, "She brought bad luck the day she married him." The words hit her like stones, but Amara didn't turn around. She pressed her lips together and stared at the grave. Her hands trembled, but she gripped them tightly around the small set of house keys she held in her palm, the only thing that still felt like it belonged to her. When the service ended, Chike's brothers didn't even look at her. They walked past her as if she were invisible. The priest gave her a soft pat on the shoulder, whispering, "Be strong, my daughter." She nodded politely, but inside her world was crumbling. That night, she sat alone on the bed she had once shared with Chike. The silence was unbearable. His clothes still hung neatly in the wardrobe, his watch still lay on the table. She clutched his pillow, breathing in the last traces of his scent. "You promised we'd grow old together," she whispered into the darkness. "But promises, like people, sometimes die too soon." She sighed. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Amara wiped her tears and whispered to herself, "I'll be fine." She didn't know it yet, but that quiet promise would change her life forever. 3 days after the funeral, the house that had once felt like home no longer welcomed Amara. She walked up the dusty path, carrying a small bag, her eyes red from sleepless nights. The compound gate stood half open, and for a moment she smiled softly, thinking maybe things would get better now that the morning was over. But as soon as she reached the gate, Chike's eldest brother, Weena, stepped out with a hard look in his eyes. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked sharply. Amara blinked in confusion. "Home," she said quietly. "This is my house." Weena gave a bitter laugh. "Your house? You forget yourself, woman. Chike is gone. You're not family anymore." Before she could speak again, the younger brother came out, carrying her small suitcase. Without a word, he tossed it into the mud at her feet. Her clothes spilled out, soaking in the dirt. Amara froze, staring down at the mess, her mind refusing to accept what was happening. Her mother-in-law stood by the door, arms folded, her face like stone. She didn't say a single word. Not to stop them, not to help her. Just silence. That silence hurt more than the insults. Amara's throat burned as she whispered, "Mama, please. Chike wouldn't want this." The old woman finally looked at her, eyes cold and tired. "You go, Amara," she said quietly. "Don't make things harder for yourself." And just like that, the door slammed shut. Amara stood in the rain that had begun to fall, clutching her muddy suitcase. Her knees felt weak, but she refused to beg. She wiped her tears, lifted her bag and started walking. She didn't even know where she was going, just away from the house that now treated her like a stranger. By evening, she found herself standing in front of a small church at the edge of the town. The pastor's wife recognized her from the funeral and let her in. "You can rest here, my dear," the woman said softly, spreading a blanket on a wooden bench. That night, Amara couldn't sleep. The sound of rain hitting the roof mixed with her quiet sobs. Everything she owned, everything she had built with Chike, was gone in a blink. But even in her pain, something inside her refused to break completely. She looked up at the small cross on the wall and whispered, "God, they threw me out like I'm nothing. But you know I'm not nothing." Her eyes closed slowly, and for the first time since the burial, her mind began to plan. Not out of anger, but out of quiet strength that no one could take away. The next morning, the sun slipped through the cracked windows of the church, lighting up the wooden benches where Amara had spent the night. Her back ached, her eyes swollen from crying, but she sat up slowly and whispered a small prayer under her breath. She didn't know what her next step would be, only that she couldn't give up now. Just as she was folding the blanket, she heard footsteps. It was Pastor Emmanuel, the kind man who had let her stay. He smiled gently, holding a brown envelope in his hands. "My daughter," he said softly, "before your husband passed, he gave me this. He said I should only give it to you if something ever happened to him." Amara froze, her heart began to race. "He left something for me," she whispered, barely believing it. "Yes," the pastor said, placing the envelope carefully in her hands. "He said it was important." Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a folded sheet of paper and another smaller envelope marked Unity Bank of Ibadan. She opened the letter first. Chike's handwriting leapt off the page, firm and familiar. "My love, if anything happens to me, go to Unity Bank. Ask for the account ending in 7631. Don't tell anyone until you're safe. Chike." Amara's lips parted in shock. She read the lines again and again, her hands shaking harder each time. She pressed the paper to her chest and began to cry, not out of sadness, but something deeper. Even in death, her husband was still trying to protect her. The pastor watched quietly, then asked gently, "Do you understand what it means?" Amara nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "Chike, he must have hidden something they don't know about." She held the sealed bank document up to the light. Her mind was spinning. Why would Chike hide a bank account from his brothers? And why give her the key to it only after his death? The thought sent chills through her body. For the first time since the funeral, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe she wasn't as helpless as they thought. Maybe Chike had already planned for this. She stood up, clutching the envelope close to her chest. "Thank you, Pastor," she said quietly. "You don't know what this means to me." He smiled kindly. "Go in peace, Amara. Whatever your husband left for you, it's for your protection." As she stepped out into the bright morning, the city noise felt different, louder, alive, almost guiding her. She looked down at the words on the paper one more time. Unity Bank, account ending in 7631. Her heartbeat quickened. She didn't have a home anymore, but she had something better. A clue, a promise, and a reason to fight back. The walk to Unity Bank in Ibadan felt longer than ever. People rushed past her, cars honked. Life moved on. But inside, her heart pounded like a drum. Every step reminded her of what she had lost, but also of what she might still have left. When she reached the glass doors of the bank, she stopped for a moment, took a deep breath and walked in. The cool air and the sharp scent of disinfectant made her nervous. Behind the counter sat a middle-aged woman in a navy blue uniform, her name tag reading Mrs. Adza. The woman looked up briefly, her expression polite but distant. "Good morning, Ma," Amara said softly, trying to sound calm. "I need to see someone about my late husband's account." The banker gave her a cautious look. "Do you have any documents or ID?" Amara nodded quickly and handed over the envelope Chike had left and her national ID card. Mrs. Adza examined them, her brow furrowing. She glanced at Amara again, perhaps wondering how this quiet, humble-looking woman could be linked to something serious. Slowly, she opened the sealed document. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the faint hum of air conditioning. Then, the banker's eyes widened. She looked up sharply at Amara. "Madam, are you Mrs. Amara Okoy, wife of Mr. Chike Okoy of Okoy Agro Limited?" Amara hesitated. "Yes, that's my husband. Why?" Mrs. Adza took a deep breath. "Your husband made you the sole signatory to the company's main account." Amara blinked, confused. company account?" she repeated, almost in disbelief. "You mean the business?" "Yes," the banker replied, still staring at the document. "It's all here, properly signed and witnessed. You have full authority over the funds." For a second, the world went quiet around Amara. Her breath caught in her throat. She gripped the counter to steady herself. Chike hadn't just left her money, he had given her control over the very business his brothers were running. Tears filled her eyes. But this time they were different. Not of pain, but of something like relief. She whispered under her breath, "You knew they'd do this to me, didn't you, Chike? You planned ahead." Mrs. Adza leaned forward gently. "Madam, would you like to see the account details?" Amara nodded slowly, her voice trembling. "Yes, show me." As the computer screen lit up, Amara's reflection appeared faintly on the glass. No longer a broken widow, but a woman standing on the edge of something powerful. She didn't know it yet, but this was the moment her entire story began to turn. Amara sat across from the banker's desk, her hands trembling as Mrs. Adza typed on the computer. The screen's glow reflected off the woman's glasses as she read through the files. "Mrs. Okoy," she said carefully, "your husband didn't just list you as a beneficiary, he made you a registered partner in Okoy Agro Limited." Amara's eyes widened. "Partner?" she repeated, almost whispering. "But his brothers, they run the company now, they never told me anything." The banker looked up with sympathy. "Maybe they didn't know. Or maybe they didn't want you to know." She turned the screen toward Amara and pointed to a document. "See here? This was signed and filed before his death. Your name is right beside his." Amara leaned forward, staring at her name written in black ink. Amara Okoy, co-owner of Okoy Agro Limited. Her breath caught in her chest. She remembered all those nights when Chike stayed up late doing paperwork. She had teased him for always keeping secrets, and he'd just smile and say, "You'll understand one day." Now she did. The banker clicked a few more times, her face growing serious. "Madam, do you want to know the balance in the company account?" Amara hesitated, her heart racing. "Yes," she said quietly. Mrs. Adza looked at the screen again, then back at her. "As of last week, the balance is 48 million naira." Amara gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Her body went weak for a moment, and she had to grab the edge of the desk to stay steady. 48 million, she repeated, her voice shaking. "That can't be real." "It's real," the banker said softly, "and it's all under your name." Tears filled Amara's eyes before she could stop them. She felt Chike's presence so strongly in that moment, as if he were standing right beside her, whispering, "I told you I'd never leave you helpless." Her heart ached with love and gratitude. He had trusted her when no one else did. She took a shaky breath, smiling through her tears. "He knew they'd try to destroy me," she said quietly. "But he made sure I had something they couldn't touch." Mrs. Adza nodded gently. "Your husband was a wise man, Ma. He believed in you." Amara wiped her tears and straightened her shoulders. For the first time since Chike's death, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like a victim. She felt powerful, chosen even. She stood up, clutching the envelope to her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. "I know what I need to do now." As she stepped out of the bank into the bright afternoon sun, she smiled through the tears streaming down her face. Her heart whispered, "You protected me, Chike. Now it's my turn to protect what you built." 2 days later, Amara stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, adjusting her white blouse and neatly pressed skirt. Her hands were steady now, not trembling with fear, but alive with quiet strength. She tied her scarf, picked up her handbag, and slipped the bank documents inside. The woman staring back at her wasn't Ati the widow who had been thrown out in the rain. This was someone new, someone ready. That morning, she had heard whispers around town. Chike's brothers were throwing a small celebration at the Okoy Agro office. They had just signed a big deal with a new supplier using company funds they didn't know belonged to her. Amara didn't plan to make a scene, but she knew one thing. It was time they saw her power. When she arrived at the company compound, loud laughter and music echoed from the open windows. The place looked alive, banners, drinks, food. like a party meant to erase her husband's memory. But Amara walked in slowly, her heels clicking against the tiled floor, her presence cutting through the noise like thunder after a calm rain. The moment they saw her, the laughter stopped. One of the brothers, Wayne, frowned. "What is she doing here?" he muttered under his breath. Amara smiled politely and walked straight to the center of the room. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice calm but clear. "I won't take much of your time." They exchanged glances, uneasy but trying to act unbothered. "You shouldn't be here," another brother snapped. Amara opened her handbag and took out a neatly folded document. "Actually," she said softly, "I think I should." She placed the papers on the table in front of them. "You've been using my funds." The room went silent. One of the men laughed awkwardly. "What are you talking about, woman?" She turned the paper toward them. The official letter from Unity Bank, stamped and signed. "This is the company account statement. My husband made me the sole signatory. That means every kobo that left this account passed through my name, Siu." Their faces drained of color. The music outside still played faintly, but inside the room, it felt like the air had frozen. Wayne stepped forward, his voice low and shaky. "That's impossible. You must be lying." Amara met his eyes, calm and steady. "Would you like to call the bank and confirm?" she asked. "I already did." For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the workers standing nearby stared in shock. The same woman they had all pitied, the widow who had been thrown out like trash, now stood tall before them, holding the papers that could destroy everything they had stolen. Amara gathered her documents and smiled faintly. "You should enjoy the celebration while it lasts," she said, "because as of today, I'm freezing every company account." Then she turned and walked out, leaving behind a silence so heavy it swallowed all their laughter. The next morning, Amara woke up before sunrise. She didn't eat, didn't even make tea. Her mind was clear and sharp. Today, she was going to end their lives for good. She opened her handbag, pulled out the letter from Unity Bank, and dialed the number of the bank manager that Mrs. Adza had given her. "Good morning, sir," she said politely but firmly. "This is Mrs. Amara Okoy, co-owner of Okoy Agro Limited. I need all company accounts frozen immediately. No withdrawals, no transfers. Not a single kobo moves until I say so." The manager paused for a second, surprised by the authority in her tone. "Understood, Ma. I'll handle it right away." Amara ended the call, her heart pounding but steady. For the first time in weeks, she felt control return to her hands. It wasn't about revenge. It was about respect, justice, and the truth Chike had left behind. An hour later, she walked into the company office again. This time, there was no laughter or celebration. Her brothers-in-law were in a meeting, talking loudly and arguing over money. When she stepped inside, they froze. "What are you doing here again?" Bob barked. "We told you to stay away from company matters." Amara didn't raise her voice. She simply pulled out her phone and said, "I just spoke to the bank manager. All company accounts are frozen until further notice." The room erupted. "What?" the youngest brother shouted, jumping to his feet. "You can't do that!" Ewina slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "You have no right!" Amara turned to him slowly, her face calm, but her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "My husband gave me every right," she said clearly, "because I earned it through loyalty, through trust, and through years of standing beside him when you all doubted him." The room went silent. Even the secretaries standing by the door stopped breathing for a second. The employees exchanged stunned glances. Whispers began to ripple through the room. They had all seen how these men had treated Amara, how they mocked her after the funeral. None of them had expected this moment. Wayne stepped closer, his face twisted with anger. "You think you can destroy this family?" he hissed. Amara met his eyes and said quietly, "I'm not destroying anything. I'm protecting what Chike built. The difference is you wanted power. I just want peace." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. The brothers stood frozen, realizing the truth. Everything they had been controlling, the money, the business, the influence, was gone in a single phone call. Amara turned and walked toward the door. As she passed the employees, one of them whispered softly, "Madame is stronger than all of them." Amara didn't look back. She simply said, Tell the staff to expect new management soon. Then she stepped into the sunlight, calm, steady, and unshakably powerful. By the end of the week, the whole city was talking about her. From market women to taxi drivers, everyone had heard the story. The widow who outsmarted the Okoye family. Some called it revenge, others called it justice. But for Amara, it was something deeper, a rebirth. She had found a small apartment in a quiet part of Ibadan. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. Every morning, she opened the curtains, looked out at the city skyline, and smiled. The woman who once slept on a church bench now woke up with purpose. Her late husband's photo sat on the small dining table beside a cup of tea. "You gave me strength, Chike," she whispered one morning. "Now I'll make you proud." When she returned to Okoye Agro Limited as managing partner, the atmosphere changed immediately. The workers who had once avoided her now stood straighter when she passed. She didn't come in shouting or firing people. She came with plans. She started by calling everyone into the conference room. "I know things have been difficult," she began gently, her voice calm but confident. "But this company fed families long before greed got in the way. We're going to rebuild it together." Some of the employees nodded, others looked uncertain, but they all listened. She replaced the dishonest supervisors with hard-working staff who had been ignored for years. She introduced weekly progress meetings, ensured everyone was paid on time, and spoke to farmers herself instead of sending middlemen. Slowly, the company began to recover. Within a month, word spread that Okoye Agro was returning to its old glory, but this time under new leadership. Local newspapers printed her story with headlines like, "Widow turns loss into legacy," and "Mrs. Okoye revives family business with grace." People who had once looked down on her began greeting her with respect. Women in the market smiled proudly when they saw her car pass by. Even some of Chike's old friends came forward, apologizing for how they had believed the lies about her. One afternoon, as she was leaving the office, a young man stopped her at the gate. "Madam," he said, smiling shyly, "my mother sells vegetables to your company. She said you treated her like family. Thank you." Amara smiled warmly. "Tell your mother we rise by lifting each other," she said, before driving off. That night, as she stood on her balcony watching the city lights, she felt peace for the first time since Chike's death. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into strength. The world had once called her a weak widow. Now, she was the woman who rebuilt everything they tried to destroy. A few weeks later, just as Amara was settling into her new routine, she heard a soft knock at her apartment door. When she opened it, her mother-in-law stood there, smaller somehow, her eyes dull with shame. The same woman who had once thrown her out of the family home now looked lost, holding a small handbag like she didn't belong anywhere. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with memories of harsh words and long nights of tears. "Amara," the old woman said finally, her voice trembling, "I was blinded by grief. When my son died, I thought you took everything from me. I didn't see how much you were hurting too." Amara just looked at her, her eyes calm but unreadable. So many emotions battled inside her: anger, sadness, compassion. This was the woman who had watched her sleep in the rain, who had said cruel things when Amara had lost everything. But now, she just looked tired, fragile, human. After a long pause, Amara stepped aside and quietly said, "Come in." They sat at the small dining table, and Amara poured tea into 2 cups. The old woman's hands shook as she lifted hers. "You've built something good here," she whispered. "Your husband would be proud." Amara met her gaze. "Grief doesn't excuse cruelty," she said softly but firmly. The words hung in the air like truth too long ignored. Her mother-in-law's eyes filled with tears. "I know," she murmured, "and I'm sorry." For a few seconds, neither spoke again. The ticking of the wall clock was the only sound. Then Amara reached across the table and touched her hand gently. "I forgive you," she said, "not because it didn't hurt, but because I refuse to let pain control me anymore." Her mother-in-law broke down quietly, whispering thank you over and over. There were no hugs, no grand speeches, just 2 women who had lost the same man. finally sharing peace instead of bitterness. As they sipped their tea, the late afternoon sun streamed through the window, bathing the room in a warm golden glow. For the first time, Amara didn't feel like an outcast or a victim. She felt strong, free, and as the old woman smiled weakly through her tears, Amara realized something powerful. Forgiveness didn't make her weak. It made her unstoppable. Months passed, and Amara's life had changed completely. The small apartment, the quiet mornings, and the careful rebuilding of the company had all led to this day. The factory that Chike had once loved, the place that had almost been lost to greed and lies, now stood proud again, bigger, brighter, and alive with workers who believed in her. She had renamed it Chike and Amara Agro Works, a tribute to the love and trust that had carried her through the darkest days. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was simple, but full of energy. Local journalists and farmers gathered, clapping and taking photos. As Amara walked to the front, her white scarf tied neatly, her face glowing with quiet confidence, she held the scissors in her hand, her fingers steady, and looked at the crowd. "This factory is not just about business," she said softly, almost to herself. "It's about trust, loyalty, and protecting what is rightfully ours." She cut the ribbon, and the crowd cheered. Workers smiled, waving at her. And even some of the employees who had once whispered behind her back now nodded with respect. She felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest. Pride, sadness, and gratitude all mixed together. Amara stepped to the side for a moment and whispered to the empty sky, "You protected me even in death, Chike, and I honored your trust." Her eyes glistened with tears, but her smile was calm and strong. She wasn't the widow who had been thrown out. She wasn't the woman who had cried alone in the church. She was a leader, a protector, and a builder of her own destiny. As the cameras captured her face, the city seemed to pause for a moment. This was more than a victory over her family's cruelty. It was a statement to the world. Amara had taken her pain and turned it into power. She had turned loss into legacy. And standing there, surrounded by the hum of machines and the voices of her workers, she finally felt whole. In the weeks that followed, the news of Amara's success spread across the country. Her story was shared on radio stations, news websites, and even on social media. She became an icon of resilience, the woman who refused to be broken by grief and betrayal. People from all walks of life reached out to her, offering support, admiration, and even friendship. Amara was invited to speak at several business conferences where she shared her journey, how she turned a devastating loss into a thriving business, how she found the strength to forgive those who wronged her, and how she rebuilt her life from the ground up. She was no longer just the wife of a successful businessman. She was now a respected entrepreneur in her own right. At home, her small apartment had transformed into a place of peace and warmth. She still kept Chike's photo on the dining table, beside a small vase of fresh flowers. But now, the room felt different. It felt like her own, filled with her own dreams and aspirations. One evening, as she sat by the window, sipping her tea and watching the city lights flicker below, she reflected on how far she had come. She had built a life from nothing, fought for her dignity, and found strength in the most unlikely places. She had become the woman she was always meant to be. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Pastor Emmanuel, the kind man who had given her a place to stay when she had nowhere else to go. "Amara, I heard the news. I'm so proud of you. Your story is one of true strength and grace. May your journey continue to inspire others." Amara smiled as she read the message. She had come so far, and it was only just the beginning. As the months passed, Amara's presence in the business world continued to grow. Chike and Amara Agro Works flourished under her leadership, becoming a beacon of success and resilience in the community. Her approach was different from her late husband's, but it was one that had been forged through hardship, wisdom, and love. Where there had once been doubts and skepticism, now there was respect. People spoke of her as a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had not only overcome personal tragedy, but had turned it into something that would benefit generations to come. Her brothers-in-law, those who had once ridiculed her and questioned her ability to manage the company, began to disappear from the public eye. They had made their choices, and Amara had made hers. It wasn't about vengeance, but about moving forward and ensuring the legacy of Chike and Amara Agro Works continued to thrive. The company's profits soared, and she began investing in local farming communities, ensuring that her business gave back to the very people who had supported her. But despite all her success, Amara knew that the most significant battle was not in the boardrooms or with the family members who had tried to strip everything from her. The real battle was within, how to maintain her own peace, her sense of self, in the face of everything she had lost. One morning, as she prepared for another busy day, she sat by the window, watching the sun rise over the hills of Ibadan. She felt a quiet peace that she hadn't known before. It was a peace that came from within, not from the approval of others or from the money and success that had once seemed so important to her. This peace was different. It was grounded in her ability to choose, to forgive, and to rebuild. As she sipped her tea, her phone buzzed again, another message from Pastor Emmanuel. "Amara, I'm so glad to see the change in you. The woman you have become is one of strength and grace. But I also want you to remember, never forget to take care of yourself. You've given so much to others, now it's time to give a little to yourself too." Amara smiled at the message. Pastor Emmanuel had been a guiding light during the darkest time of her life. He had taught her the importance of self-care, not just for her physical well-being, but for her soul. She made a promise to herself that day to find balance in all things. She would continue to lead her company, continue to serve the community, but she would also find time for rest, for reflection, for joy. One evening, while walking through the company's newly renovated office, Amara paused to look at the portraits hanging on the walls. They were portraits of her and Chike, side by side, smiling in the photos from their earlier days. Amara touched the frame of the one taken on their wedding day. She hadn't realized until now how much she had changed since then. She had once been a young woman, full of dreams, but uncertain of her place in the world. Now she was a woman who had lived through loss, betrayal, and hardship. And yet she was stronger for it. Chike had always believed in her, and now, in his absence, she was proving to herself and to the world that his belief in her was never misplaced. Amara felt a sense of fulfillment wash over her, not from any financial gain or public recognition, but from the deep, quiet satisfaction of knowing she had become the person she had always hoped to be. She had learned that true strength wasn't about how much you could carry on your shoulders, but about how gracefully you could navigate the storms in life. It wasn't about fighting every battle, it was about choosing the battles that mattered and walking away from those that didn't. And now, as she stood before the company's new board of directors, a room filled with people who respected her, not because of her family name, but because of her hard work and dedication, she knew that she had found her true calling. She had not only rebuilt the company, but had also rebuilt herself. The board meeting ended, and Amara walked out into the hallway, where one of her closest colleagues, Linda, caught up with her. "How does it feel, Amara?" Linda asked, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You've done it. You've turned everything around." Amara smiled, but there was no arrogance in it, only quiet gratitude. "It feels good," she said simply. "But I've realized that this isn't just about me. It's about the people who believed in me, the people who stood by me when I had nothing. This company, this life, it's all a gift." Linda laughed softly. "You're too humble. You've done it, Amara. You've built something incredible." Amara paused for a moment, looking out the window at the busy street below. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city. "I didn't do it alone," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "But I did it because I believed in what was right, and I'll keep doing it, for as long as I can." As the months continued to unfold, Amara's life began to take on a rhythm that she had never known before. She still worked tirelessly, still gave her all to Chike and Amara Agro Works, but there was a new sense of calm in her heart. She had achieved more than she ever thought possible, and yet every step she took felt like a new beginning. Her decision to take on new projects was met with both admiration and skepticism, but Amara was undeterred. She began to invest in local schools and training centers, determined to give the next generation the opportunities she had never had. She funded scholarships for young women who dreamed of becoming engineers, scientists, and entrepreneurs, dreams that had once been dismissed as impossible. She worked to create sustainable farming practices that not only boosted the company's bottom line, but also helped preserve the environment for future generations. And with each success, Amara felt a quiet pride settle in her soul. She had turned her pain into power, her grief into a legacy, but she knew there was still work to be done. Okoye Agro was thriving under her leadership, but there was so much more to be done. She couldn't stop now, not when there was so much left to change. One of the greatest changes was in the community. The farmers who had once felt neglected by Chike's family now felt like partners. Amara made sure that they were paid fairly, that they had the support they needed to succeed. She visited their farms, sat with them, learned their struggles, and worked tirelessly to bring about solutions. The people who had once looked down on her, who had whispered behind her back, now looked up to her. She had earned their respect, and with it, their trust. Amara often found herself reflecting on how much she had learned about herself over the past year. She had discovered a resilience in her spirit that she had never known existed. But what had been the most surprising to her was how her ability to forgive had opened up doors she never thought would be available to her. When she had first arrived at that small church, alone and broken, she never could have imagined that she would find such strength within. Forgiveness had been the key. Both forgiving her mother-in-law and forgiving herself. It had freed her from the chains of bitterness and self-doubt that had once held her prisoner. She had been so focused on proving everyone wrong, on showing her worth to the world. But now she realized that her worth was never in question. It had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. One afternoon, as Amara sat in her office, going over the company's latest quarterly report, there was a knock on the door. She looked up to see one of her employees, a young woman named Titi, standing in the doorway, holding a folder in her hands. Titi had been with the company since its early days and had become one of Amara's most trusted advisors. "Amara," Titi said, stepping into the room. "There's something you should see." Amara motioned for her to sit. "What's going on?" Titi placed the folder on the desk. "It's the company's financial records," she said, her voice tight with concern. "There's a discrepancy." Amara's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of discrepancy?" Titi hesitated for a moment, but then opened the folder and handed Amara a set of documents. "It looks like some of the company's funds have been mismanaged. Large amounts of money were transferred without proper documentation. I think someone on the board might be embezzling." Amara stared at the papers, her mind racing. She had worked so hard to build trust, to restore the company's reputation, and now this. She couldn't believe it. For a moment, she felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, but she pushed it down. She wasn't going to let this stop her. Not now. "Do you have any suspects?" Amara asked, her voice steady. Titi nodded. "I've been doing some digging. I have a few names, but I need your approval before I can take this further." Amara took a deep breath. She had known from the beginning that trust was a fragile thing. She had built this company with integrity, and now someone was trying to tear it down from the inside. But she wasn't going to let that happen. She would find out who was behind this, and she would make sure they were held accountable. "Go ahead," Amara said, her voice firm. "We'll investigate this, and we'll do it quietly. We can't let this get out. The last thing we need is bad press." Titi nodded and left the room, leaving Amara alone with her thoughts. The weight of this new challenge hung heavily on her shoulders. But she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to let anyone take what she had worked so hard for. She had fought too long and too hard to lose it all now. That night, as Amara sat in her apartment, staring out at the city, she realized that this was the final test. She had proven herself capable of turning her life around, of rebuilding what had been lost. But now, she had to prove that she could protect it, no matter the cost. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I will protect this. For Chike, for myself, and for everyone who believes in me." The following days were filled with tension as Amara worked quietly behind the scenes to uncover the truth. Her mind was sharp, focused as she reviewed every document, spoke with trusted colleagues, and sifted through the financial records. Titi was her ally in this, providing information and support, but Amara knew that the trail of deception ran deeper than she could have anticipated. Despite the pressure, she didn't allow herself to fall into fear. It wasn't just about the money. It was about maintaining the integrity of everything she had built. Chike and Amara Agro Works was her life now, and she wasn't going to let anyone, whether it was a trusted employee or a family member, undermine all her hard work. The more she dug into the records, the more she uncovered discrepancies that pointed to one person: Emeka, the company's chief financial officer. He had been with the company since its early days, trusted by Chike, and had been instrumental in managing its growth. But Amara was no longer blinded by loyalty. She couldn't afford to be. One evening, Amara called Titi into her office. "I need you to gather all the evidence you have on Emeka. We're going to confront him." Titi hesitated. "Are you sure, Amara? He's been with the company for years. If we're wrong—" "I'm not wrong," Amara interrupted, her voice steady but cold. "The numbers don't lie." Titi nodded and left to carry out her task. Amara sat back in her chair, staring out at the skyline of Ibadan. This was the moment where everything would be decided. She had faced betrayal before, from her in-laws, from the people who had doubted her after Chike's death. But this was different. This time, the betrayal was from someone who had been a part of her team, someone she had trusted. The next day, Titi returned with a folder full of damning evidence. It was clear Emeka had been siphoning off money from the company for months. He had manipulated financial reports, forged signatures, and even created fake accounts to launder the money. Amara's blood ran cold as she stared at the documents. Emeka had been so careful, so clever. But Amara was no fool. She had seen through the smoke and mirrors, and now the truth was laid bare before her. This man, who had once been a trusted ally, had betrayed her and her company for his own gain. That afternoon, Amara called a meeting with the board of directors. She didn't waste any time. As the room filled with the company's key players, Amara stood at the head of the table, her eyes steady and unwavering. "Thank you for joining me," she began, her voice calm but firm. "I've called this meeting because there is a matter that needs to be addressed, one that affects the future of this company." The room went quiet as Amara pulled the folder in front of her. "This is the evidence of financial misconduct. I'm afraid we have a problem." She slid the folder across the table. Every eye in the room was on her as they examined the papers. The room was thick with disbelief as they realized the extent of Emeka's betrayal. One by one, their gazes turned to Emeka, who was sitting at the far end of the table, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously. Amara turned to Emeka. "How could you do this?" she asked, her voice quiet but full of hurt. "You've been like family to us, to me." Emeka shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hands trembling. "Amara, I don't know what to say." "Don't speak," she said, her voice colder now. "You'll have plenty of time to explain yourself to the authorities." The room was silent as Amara turned to the board members. "We'll be reporting this to the police. I'm revoking your position, Emeka. You're no longer welcome here." Amara's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she turned back to the others. "We will move forward without him. But we must all understand one thing. Integrity is everything. The success of this company is built on trust. Without that, we have nothing." After the meeting, Amara felt the weight of the moment settle over her. It wasn't just the financial loss that hurt. It was the betrayal. It was the fact that someone who had been part of her journey, the journey Chike had started, had so easily turned his back on her. But she had learned long ago that the only way forward was to keep moving, no matter what obstacles lay in her path. She had faced the death of her husband, the betrayal of her in-laws, and now this. And yet, she was still standing. The next morning, she received a call from the police. Emeka had been arrested and was facing serious charges of embezzlement and fraud. He had tried to flee the country, but the authorities had caught him in time. Amara felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. Justice was being served, but the feeling was bittersweet. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Pastor Emmanuel. "Amara, I know this must be a difficult time, but remember, the strength you've shown through every challenge is a testament to your faith Stay the course. Your journey is far from over. Amara smiled at the message. Pastor Emmanuel had always known the right words to say when she needed them most. She had faced down the ghosts of the past, fought through the darkness, and come out stronger. Chike and Amara Agro Works was hers now, and she would protect it, no matter the cost. But the story didn't end there. With Emika gone and the company's future secure, Amara turned her attention back to what mattered most: rebuilding. She began to meet with new investors, looking to expand her operations and reach even more farmers, empowering them with the tools and knowledge they needed to succeed. She continued to invest in her community, offering scholarships, creating new job opportunities, and forging partnerships that would elevate her people. And through it all, she never stopped thinking about Chike. His memory was always with her. His love and trust, the foundation upon which she had built her new life. One day, as Amara stood on the balcony of her office overlooking the sprawling city of Ibadan, she felt a deep sense of peace settle within her. She had done it. She had turned pain into power, loss into legacy. And now, she could look to the future with hope. The past had shaped her, but it would not define her. She had created something new, a life that was her own, a future that was hers to shape, and nothing, no one, could take that away from her. Amara stood at the edge of her office window, gazing out at the sprawling city of Ibadan, her heart full of quiet contentment. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the city below. She had fought for so long, and now, for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. Chike's death had almost broken her, but it had also given her the strength to rebuild her life. His memory, his legacy, and the love they had shared were all woven into the fabric of Chike and Amara Agro Works. Every decision she made, every step she took, was rooted in the belief that she was carrying forward something far greater than herself. As the weeks passed, the company continued to thrive. Amara worked tirelessly to expand their reach, forging partnerships with local farmers, government agencies, and international distributors. The farm-to-table movement had taken off, and Amara was at the forefront of it. She knew the importance of not only sustaining the company, but also of supporting the community that had helped her when she had nothing. Her hard work did not go unnoticed. The local media began to take notice of her achievements. Chike and Amara Agro Works was no longer just a business. It had become a symbol of resilience and hope. Amara had built something lasting, something that would provide for generations to come. One afternoon, as she sat in her office, reviewing contracts with her legal team, she received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. Her fingers hesitated over the screen for a moment before she answered. "Hello? Is this Mrs. Amara Okoy?" The voice on the other end was formal, but there was a hint of recognition. "My name is Victor Adebayo. I represent the National Agricultural Association. We've been following your work, and we would like to discuss a potential partnership with Chike and Amara Agro Works." Amara felt a flicker of excitement. A partnership with a national association could take her company to new heights. "What kind of partnership?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "We are looking to invest in sustainable farming practices across the country, and we believe your company aligns perfectly with our vision. We would like to discuss the possibility of working together on a large-scale project that could benefit both our organizations." Amara's mind raced as she considered the possibilities. This was the kind of opportunity she had always dreamed of, the chance to expand her impact, to make a difference on a larger scale. But with every opportunity came a risk, and Amara wasn't someone who took risks lightly. "I'd like to meet in person," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Let's set up a time to discuss the details." The meeting with Victor Adebayo and his team took place 2 days later in a sleek conference room at the National Association's headquarters. Amara arrived early, dressed in a sharp black suit, her white headscarf neatly tied around her head. She was confident, poised, and ready. As she sat across from Victor, a man in his early 40s with sharp features and an air of authority, she listened intently as he outlined the proposal. "We are looking for a partner who shares our commitment to sustainable agriculture," Victor said, his eyes focused on Amara. "Your company has demonstrated not only financial success, but also a genuine commitment to the community. We believe that by working together, we can create a national network that promotes sustainable farming, fair wages for farmers, and environmental conservation. Amara nodded thoughtfully, considering the proposal. This was exactly the kind of initiative she wanted to be part of. Something that could have a positive, lasting impact on the entire country. "I'm interested," she said after a moment, her voice measured. "But I need to know more about your plans. How do you plan to ensure that farmers benefit directly from this partnership? And what guarantees do we have that the values of integrity and fairness will be upheld?" Victor smiled, clearly impressed by her attention to detail. "We've already laid the groundwork for a fair distribution system. We'll be working directly with local farmers to ensure they receive a fair share of the profits. We've also set up an oversight committee to ensure that everything remains transparent. We're fully committed to making this partnership a success." Amara leaned back in her chair, considering the offer. It sounded promising, but there was still something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She had learned the hard way to trust only what she could see and verify for herself. "I'll need to review the full contract and get back to you," she said finally. "I won't make any decisions until I'm sure everything is in order." Victor nodded, not at all surprised by her cautious approach. "Of course, we're happy to provide you with all the details. Take your time." Over the next few days, Amara pored over the contract with her legal team, examining every clause, every provision. There were no glaring issues, but Amara's intuition told her to be cautious. She reached out to some of the farmers she worked with directly, asking them about the association's past projects. The feedback was mostly positive, but there were a few murmurs of discontent. Some farmers expressed concerns about the transparency of previous partnerships, and others mentioned delays in payments. Amara wasn't one to make assumptions, but she knew how easily things could go wrong when the wrong people were in charge. She called Victor to arrange a second meeting, this time with some of her trusted advisors in tow. The second meeting took place a week later. This time, Amara brought her chief operating officer, Kofi, and her lead accountant, Ngozi, both of whom had been with her since the early days of rebuilding the company. They sat in the conference room, papers spread out in front of them as Victor once again pitched the partnership. "I've reviewed the contract," Amara said, cutting straight to the point. "But I have some concerns about the transparency of your financial practices. I've heard from a few of the farmers you've worked with, and there are some discrepancies. Can you explain that?" Victor's face tightened, but he quickly regained his composure. "Those are just rumors. There are always people who are dissatisfied with the terms of any deal. We've done everything by the book." Amara raised an eyebrow. "I don't deal with rumors, I deal with facts. And I've asked my team to conduct a full audit of your past projects. If you want this partnership to move forward, I need to see the results of that audit, nothing less." There was a long silence as Victor stared at her. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I understand. I'll arrange for the audit to be completed. But I hope you realize that delaying this partnership could set us back significantly." Amara met his gaze with a steady look. "I'm not interested in speed. I'm interested in building something that lasts." The following weeks were filled with tension. Amara kept her guard up, watching carefully as the audit progressed. And slowly, the truth began to emerge. There were indeed issues with some of the past projects Victor's association had run. Payments to farmers had been delayed, and the promised support systems had been half-heartedly implemented. Amara didn't hesitate. She pulled out of the partnership. She called Victor one last time. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said. "But after reviewing the audit and the history of your projects, I've decided not to move forward with this partnership. I won't compromise the values I've built this company on." There was a moment of silence before Victor spoke, his voice tight. "I see. Well, I respect your decision, but remember, opportunities like this don't come around every day." Amara's voice was calm but firm. "I don't need shortcuts, Victor. I've built this company from the ground up, and I'll continue to do so, with integrity." A few weeks after that decision, Chike and Amara AgroWorks continued to thrive. Amara had turned down the partnership, but she had learned something invaluable. Her instincts had been right. She had stayed true to her values, and in doing so, had kept her company on the path of integrity. Amara stood at the helm of a growing empire, But more importantly, she stood as a symbol of strength. She had taken the grief of loss, the sting of betrayal, and turned it into something powerful. Every day, she carried her husband's legacy forward. But now, she carried it in her own way, shaping the future with courage, compassion, and unwavering conviction. As Amara continued to grow Chike and Amara Agro Works, her reputation spread far beyond the boundaries of Ibadan. Her name became synonymous with resilience and empowerment. The business community respected her for the way she had turned the company around, overcoming personal loss, family betrayal, and financial setbacks. But for Amara, it wasn't just about the success of the company. It was about proving that a woman, especially one who had lost so much, could still rise and lead with dignity. But not everyone was thrilled with Amara's newfound success. One morning, as she entered her office, she found a letter on her desk. The envelope was simple, but there was a sense of foreboding in the air. She opened it quickly, her heart racing as she read the contents. "Dear Mrs. Amara Okoy, you have taken what is rightfully ours. The company that you now control was built by the sweat and blood of our family. We will not stand by while you steal from us. We demand that you relinquish all control of Okoy Agro Works and return everything to its rightful owners. If you do not comply, we will be forced to take legal action. Yours, sincerely, Jena Okoy, Chike's brother." Amara's hands trembled as she read the letter again. Her in-laws were threatening to take the company from her. The same people who had betrayed her after Chike Iga's death were now trying to take what was hers. What she had built, with blood, sweat, and tears. She stood in the center of her office, the letter clenched tightly in her hand. Anger and disbelief surged through her, but she didn't let herself act on it. She had worked too hard, fought too long, to let anyone take this from her. Amara called Kofi and Ngozi into her office, her voice steady, despite the storm brewing inside her. "Chike's family is making their move," she said, showing them the letter. "They want the company back." Kofi read the letter, his face grim. "This is what we feared, Amara. They won't give up easily. They think they have a right to the business, but they're wrong. We can't let them get away with this." Ngozi nodded, her expression hardening. "We need to fight back. This is ours now. They'll regret this." Amara took a deep breath, her thoughts racing. She had faced betrayal before. She had faced the death of her husband, the loss of her home, the cruelty of her in-laws. But this was different. This was a battle for the future of her company, and she couldn't afford to back down. "I won't give up," she said quietly. "We'll fight them with everything we have." The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers, accountants, and financial experts. Amara knew she couldn't handle this battle alone. She needed all the support she could get. The legal team she assembled worked tirelessly to prepare for the fight. They gathered evidence, reviewed documents, and made sure they were ready for whatever her in-laws had planned. Amara didn't want to go to court. She didn't want to drag her family's name through the mud, but if they were going to take what she had built, she had no choice. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. The stress of the situation weighed heavily on her, but Amara refused to let it break her. She had been through too much, survived too much, to let anyone take her company from her. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Amara sat alone in her office, looking over the documents once more. The silence in the room was oppressive, but she welcomed it. She needed this moment to gather her thoughts, to remind herself of everything she had fought for. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Titi. "Amara, the Okoys are moving forward with their lawsuit. They've filed official papers, and they're remaking threats of seizing the company's assets if we don't comply." Amara's heart sank as she read the message. This was no longer just a family dispute. It was a full-blown legal war. She stood up, pacing the room. She had always known this day might come, but she had hoped it wouldn't. Her in-laws were not just after the company, they were after everything. They were trying to destroy her, but she wasn't about to let them. The next morning, Amara met with her legal team and devised a strategy. The fight would be long, but Amara was prepared to do whatever it took to protect what she had built. She knew the legal battle would be brutal, but she also knew that her position was strong. She had the documents, the proof, and the willpower to win. Amara's phone rang later that afternoon. It was Pastor Emmanuel. Amara, my daughter, I know you're going through a difficult time right now, he said softly, but I want you to remember something. This battle isn't just about the company, it's about your integrity, your strength, your character. You have already proven that you are a leader. Don't let them take that away from you. Amara's throat tightened, and she felt a lump form in her chest. She had never felt more alone than she did in that moment. But Pastor Emmanuel's words grounded her. He was right. This wasn't just about the company, it was about everything she had stood for. "Thank you, Pastor," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I needed to hear that." She hung up the phone, taking a deep breath. She was ready to fight. The lawsuit dragged on for weeks. The legal teams went back and forth exchanging documents, counterclaims, and rebuttals. But Amara stood firm, never wavering in her resolve. She had a vision for the company, and she wasn't going to let anyone, especially not her in-laws, take that away from her. In the midst of the battle, she also found time to continue growing the company. The workers who had once doubted her now looked to her for leadership, and Amara made sure to continue supporting them, offering training programs, raising wages, and ensuring that Chike and Amara Agro Works remained a beacon of hope for the local community. Her strength and determination were not just about survival, they were about creating something that would last. Chike and Amara Agro Works was more than just a company. It was a legacy. One evening, as Amara sat in her office reviewing the final documents before the court date, she received a call from Titi. "Amara, I just got word," Titi said, her voice urgent. "Your in-laws want to settle. They've realized they don't have a case. They're willing to drop the lawsuit if you agree to give them a portion of the company's shares." Amara felt a mixture of relief and anger. Her in-laws were trying to buy their way back into the company, but they were offering a fraction of what they had taken from her. She thought for a moment, then made her decision. "No," she said firmly. "Tell them the only thing I am willing to give them is what Chike left for me. They'll get nothing more." TT was quiet for a moment, then spoke. "Amara, they're not going to back down. They'll push you to the brink." Amara stood up, her resolve hardening. "Let them. I fought for everything I have. I won't give it up now." The day of the court hearing finally arrived. Amara walked into the courtroom, her head held high, her heart steady. She knew the fight was far from over, but she was ready. Her lawyer stood beside her, and across the room, Amara saw Uina and the other members of the Okoy family. Their faces were cold, their eyes filled with resentment, but Amara didn't flinch. She knew what she had to do. The courtroom buzzed with activity as the judge called the case to order. Amara's legal team presented their evidence, detailed records, financial documents, and testimonies from employees who had witnessed the Okoy's attempts to sabotage the business. Her in-laws had no case. The judge's decision came swiftly. "The court finds in favor of Mrs. Amara Okoy. The Okoy family is not entitled to any further claims on the business. The ownership remains with Amara Okoy, and the company's assets shall not be seized." Amara stood as the gavel struck, the weight of the victory settling over her like a blanket. She had won, not just for herself, but for Chike and Amara Agro Works. The company was hers, and nothing could take it away. As she walked out of the courtroom, Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had fought back against the darkness and had come out victorious. Amara stepped out of the courtroom, her heart still racing, but a sense of peace settling over her like a shield. The weight of the battle had been exhausting, and her emotions were raw, but she had won. Chike and Amara Agro Works was safe, and her in-laws, though bitter and resentful, could no longer touch what was hers. For the first time in months, Amara allowed herself a breath of relief. Titi was waiting for her outside, her eyes wide with surprise. She had been her unwavering support throughout the entire ordeal, and now, standing beside Amara in the aftermath, her smile was brighter than ever. "You did it, Amara," Titi said, her voice full of pride. "You really did it. They couldn't break you." Amara smiled faintly, nodding as she looked out over the busy streets of Ibadan. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us. The people who believed in me, the workers, the team we've built. This victory belongs to all of us." Titi laughed softly, her eyes filled with admiration. "You've turned everything they threw at you into something unbreakable. You're an inspiration." Amara felt the tears well up in her eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of grief or pain. They were tears of triumph, of gratitude for how far she had come. She had fought through the darkest times of her life, and now she stood taller than ever. "I couldn't have done it without you, Titi," Amara said softly, her voice shaking. "You've been by my side every step of the way." Titi pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. "I'm proud of you, Amara. You've proven that no one can take your power, not even your in-laws, not even the world. You are the true force behind this company." As they stood there, surrounded by the noise of the city, Amara couldn't help but feel the weight of everything she had accomplished. She had started out as a woman who had lost everything. But now, she was a force to be reckoned with. She had rebuilt what was taken from her, and she had done it her way. The days following the court victory were a whirlwind of media attention. News outlets across the city covered the story of the widow who had taken on her in-laws and come out victorious. Amara became a symbol of strength and resilience. Her story was shared on social media, in newspapers, and on television, inspiring countless others who had felt powerless in the face of loss and betrayal. The workers at Chike and Amara Agro Works began to see the fruits of their hard work paying off. With Amara at the helm, the company's profits steadily increased. She was more than just a businesswoman now, she was a leader, and her vision for the future of the company was clearer than ever. One afternoon, as Amara walked through the factory, she couldn't help but smile at the bustling activity around her. The workers were engaged, focused, and proud of what they had accomplished. The factory, which had once been a place of tension and corruption, was now thriving. Her assistant, Kofi, caught up with her, holding a stack of documents in his hands. "Amara, we've just received the latest financial report," he said, his voice excited. "The company's growth rate has exceeded projections by 20%. We're doing better than we ever expected." Amara looked over the report, her eyes scanning the numbers. It was exactly what she had hoped for, proof that her hard work, her determination, and her decisions were paying off. The company was not just surviving, it was thriving. "That's amazing," Amara said, her voice filled with satisfaction. "We've come a long way." Kofi smiled. "You've done it, Amara. You've turned this company into a beacon of success. The world is watching." Amara paused, taking a moment to let the weight of his words sink in. She had never imagined her journey would lead her here, from the woman who had been cast aside by her in-laws to the head of a company that was now growing beyond her wildest dreams. She had achieved something no one, especially her in-laws, had ever thought possible. But success wasn't the only change in Amara's life. As the company flourished, her personal life began to shift as well. She had spent so long focused on surviving and rebuilding that she had forgotten what it felt like to live for herself. But now, as the days grew longer and the air in Ibadan grew warmer, Amara found herself thinking more and more about the future. Her friendship with Pastor Emmanuel deepened. He continued to offer her guidance, but now it was not just about surviving. It was about living a life full of purpose. Amara realized that her journey was not over, it was just beginning. She had rebuilt her husband's legacy, but now it was time to build her own future, her own story. One evening, as Amara sat in her office, staring out over the city, her phone rang. It was Titi. "Amara," Titi said, her voice full of excitement. "I've been talking to a few investors. They're interested in partnering with us to expand the business internationally." Amara's heart skipped a beat. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, the chance to take Chike and Amara Agro Works to the next level. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but with the right team and the right vision, she could make it happen. "Let's do it," Amara said, her voice filled with conviction. "Let's take this company global." The days that followed were filled with planning, negotiations, and strategic decisions. Amara knew that the next phase of growth would be the most challenging yet. But she was ready. She had faced the darkest of days, and now she was walking into the light. She knew there would be obstacles along the way, but she had faced worse. Nothing could stop her now. She had not just inherited her husband's legacy, she had forged her own. Chike and Amara Agro Works was now a symbol of strength, resilience, and the power of believing in yourself. Weeks later, as Amara stood in front of a crowd at a major business conference, she looked out at the audience with a quiet smile on her face. She had been invited to speak about the journey of rebuilding Chike and Amara Agro Works and the lessons she had learned along the way. As she spoke, her voice steady and confident, she realized something profound. She was no longer the woman who had been abandoned and betrayed. She was no longer the widow who had nothing. She was a leader, a trailblazer, and someone who had created her own destiny. Amara ended her speech to a standing ovation. As she left the stage, she felt a rush of emotion. She had done it. She had built something that would last, a legacy not only for Chike, but for herself. She had turned her pain into power, her loss into strength, and her dreams into reality. When she returned to her hotel room that night, she sat quietly by the window, looking out at the city lights below. She thought of Chike, and for the first time in a long while, she felt peace. He had always believed in her, and now she had proven him right. "I made you proud, Chike," she whispered softly into the night. And with that, Amara knew that her journey was far from over. The future was hers to create, and nothing would stand in her way. As the months went by, Amara's transformation became a testament to her strength, resilience, and wisdom. Chike and Amara Agro Works was no longer just a family business. It was a thriving enterprise that had expanded beyond the borders of Ibadan, reaching markets in other parts of Nigeria and beyond. The dream she and Chike had once shared had become a reality, and she had proven that the strength to rise above adversity could create something truly remarkable. Her days were filled with meetings, negotiations, and strategic decisions. But amidst the hustle, Amara had learned to make time for the people who had supported her along the way. She had reconnected with her old friends and mentors, people who had stood by her when she had nothing but faith and determination. One afternoon, Amara received a call that would change everything. It was from Titi, her closest friend and business partner. "Amara," Titi said, her voice filled with excitement, "I've just been offered a chance to speak at an international business summit. They want you to be the keynote speaker." Amara's heart raced. The offer was a dream come true. An opportunity to take her story to a global audience, to share the lessons she had learned, and to inspire others who were fighting their own battles. But as much as the idea thrilled her, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of uncertainty. She had been so focused on rebuilding the company, on honoring Chike's legacy, that she hadn't fully realized the extent of her own transformation. "Are you sure they want me?" Amara asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Yes. They specifically asked for you, Amara," Titi replied. "You've become an icon of resilience and success. You have a story that will inspire the world." Amara sat back in her chair, the weight of the invitation sinking in. This was it, the moment when her journey would come full circle. She had fought for her place, not just in the world of business, but in the world as a whole. This was her chance to show everyone that a woman who had lost everything could rise to the top. The days leading up to the summit were a blur of preparation. Amara spent countless hours rehearsing her speech, refining her message, and rehearsing in front of a mirror, making sure she was ready for the biggest audience of her life. She wasn't just speaking about business or success. She was speaking about survival, resilience, and the power of never giving up. The day of the summit arrived, and Amara stood backstage, watching as the crowd filed into the grand hall. The room was filled with some of the most influential business leaders, entrepreneurs, and changemakers from around the world. Amara could feel the nerves bubbling up inside her, but she fought them back. She had come this far. She wasn't about to back down now. When it was time for her to take the stage, Amara stepped out into the spotlight, her heart pounding in her chest. The room fell silent as the audience turned their attention toward her. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice steady but strong. "I stand before you today as a woman who has experienced the worst kind of loss. I have been betrayed, abandoned, and cast aside. But I am also a woman who has rebuilt everything I lost, not through anger or vengeance, but through patience, strength, and faith." Amara continued, sharing her journey with the audience. She spoke of Chike's death, of the betrayal from her in-laws, of the struggles she faced after being thrown out of her own home. But she also spoke of the strength she found in herself, the quiet resolve that had pushed her forward even when everything seemed lost. "I didn't just rebuild a company," she said, her voice unwavering. "I rebuilt myself, and I did it because I believed that no matter how dark things got, there was always a way forward." The room was silent, hanging on every word. Amara's story was not just one of business success. It was a story of hope, of the human spirit's ability to overcome even the greatest obstacles. By the time she finished, the audience was on its feet, applauding her with a thunderous ovation. Amara stood there, her heart swelling with pride. This was more than just a triumph for her business. This was a triumph for every woman, every person who had ever been told they weren't good enough, strong enough, or capable enough to succeed. The impact of her speech rippled across the globe. Articles, interviews, and news segments featured Amara's story, inspiring millions. She became a symbol of empowerment for women in business, for those who had faced hardship and adversity, and for anyone who believed in the power of resilience. But despite her newfound fame, Amara remained grounded. She continued to work tirelessly at Chike and Amara Agro Works, overseeing its expansion, improving its processes, and ensuring that the company remained true to the values that had made it successful in the first place. Her relationship with her mother-in-law, Amara Okoy, had also started to heal. After months of distance, the two women had begun to understand each other better. They still had their differences, but there was a sense of mutual respect now. Amara had forgiven her mother-in-law, not just for the cruelty she had endured, but for the pain that had caused it. Together, they began to rebuild the broken pieces of their relationship, learning that forgiveness was not just for the one who had wronged you. It was for yourself as well. Months later, as Amara walked through the newly renovated factory floors of Chike and Amara Agro Works, she felt a deep sense of pride. The workers were bustling with energy, the machines humming in the background. The once dying company was now thriving, and the legacy of Chike was alive and well. But more than that, Amara had built her own legacy. She had proven that she was not just a widow, not just a victim, but a force to be reckoned with. She walked into her office, her eyes scanning the walls that were filled with photos of the team, the growth charts, and the many accomplishments they had achieved together. It was a symbol of everything she had fought for. Her phone rang, and she smiled when she saw it was Titi. "Amara, I just got off the phone with the board," Titi said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "They've approved the international expansion plan. We're going global, Amara. This is it. The world is ready for Chike and Amara Agro Works." Amara leaned back in her chair, her eyes closing for a moment, as she let the magnitude of the moment wash over her. She had come so far from the woman who had been cast aside, the woman who had been told she would never succeed. Now, she was on the brink of making her mark on the world. "Thank you, Titi," Amara said, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for believing in me, for never giving up on me." "You're the one who did all the work, Amara," Titi replied. "You're the one who turned it all around." Amara smiled, her heart full. She had done it. She had taken her pain and turned it into power, her loss into legacy. And now, the world was hers for the taking. As she looked out the window, the sun setting over the city of Ibadan, Amara whispered to herself, "You protected me, Chike, and now I'm going to make you proud." And so, Amara's journey reminds us all that no matter how deep the wounds, no matter how harsh the betrayal, we have the power to rise. Life will try to break us, but it's in those broken moments that we find our true strength. Amara's story is a testament to resilience, the importance of forgiveness, and the courage to fight for what is rightfully ours. I hope her journey inspires you to never give up, to always stand tall in the face of adversity, and to remember that your story is still being written, just like hers. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring tales. Until next time, remember, strength is built in the hardest moments, and your greatest victory is yet to come. If you like this story, make sure you subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share with your friends and family so you do not miss the next powerful story coming your way. Drop a heart in comment, like and subscribe my channel, and visit my channel for more interesting story videos.